Inside the stories that affect you. This is Inside KELOLAND.
Good evening, I'm Perry Groten. Thanks for joining us. This week, lawmakers will return to Pierre for the 95th South Dakota legislative session. On this week's Inside KELOLAND, we're talking to the Majority Leader of the State Senate and the Minority Leader of the State House to get a preview of the upcoming session. Also, we're going to hear from KELOLAND's Capitol News Bureau reporter Bob Mercer as he gets ready for the legislative session. And we're going to look back at one of our top stories from this past week. KELOLAND's Don Jorgensen sits down with the authors of The Duct Tape Killer, the new book that chronicles the crimes, capture, and conviction of Robert Leroy Anderson. First off, we're going to start with the legislative session. Joining me now is State Senator Chris Langer, who's the Majority Leader of the South Dakota Senate. Thanks for joining us, Chris.
You're very welcome.
Well, what does a legislator like yourself do in the days leading up to the session to prepare?
Wow, well, there's lots that we do. Obviously, there's lots of phone calls to answer and interviews to do, and just get as prepared as we can to make things go smoothly once session starts.
And what is the big priority you see for the upcoming 2020 session?
You know, you're probably going to hear this a lot, but I think it's funding is the biggest thing. You know, trying to stretch those dollars the best that we can. We know that our budget is lean. I think there's an appetite to try to find funding for all of the big three, for education, for our providers, and for state employees, if we can. Obviously, it's going to be a challenge. And
Governor Noem has proposed a budget proposal that does not call for inflationary increases for state employees or for teachers' pay as well. How is that going to play out, do you think?
You know, there was definitely some concern once we heard that before the budget address, and I think that's where people need to remember that now it's the legislature's turn to decide where our priorities are and where we can find, you know, maybe where we can shift some dollars around, and hopefully we can do that.
But that would involve making some cuts, some hard decided on cuts, right?
Yes, quite possibly. I know our appropriators are looking hard to find us the money, find where we can. Because each percent is several $1 million, so it's not an easy fix. But we're going to work hard and we're going to do our best.
South Dakota has had lean budgets in the past, but this year it's different in your mind, do you think?
I think it is a little bit. You know, not only was it a tough ag year, but we had the disasters combined with it. So ag is our budgets are affected by it. Plus we gained some internet tax, but lost some taxes because of that. And now federally, we have some changes in our tobacco laws, so we'll lose some funding there. So it's just to kind of figure out how to make some of those back up.
Another issue that lawmakers will be taking up will be whether or not to legalize industrial hemp. Governor Noem last week came out with some guardrails that she wants to see the legislature address before she would sign any legislation. Where do you think legalizing hemp will go?
Yeah, I totally appreciate the governor coming out right away so we can address it. And, last session it seemed like that kind of consumed a lot of our time. So I think her desire as well as mine is that we tackle it right away and move forward.
Do you think a bill will emerge from the session that she would sign?
I do think so. I think, it obviously has to go through our appropriations process. There's some dollars tied to it as far as startup fees and ongoing fees. And so it'll be another challenge to find out where are those revenue sources going to come from, and is it going to be ready for prime time? Are we going to need some of those? Are we going to have to wait and build some of those dollars? That will be the questions to ask.
Another issue would be addressing mental health needs of South Dakotans. Where do you see that going?
You know, we had a summer study the year before, and then 5 different task forces this year that worked really hard on basically as a whole access to care and making sure that we're utilizing the dollars the best that we can. And so you'll see some pretty good legislation. It's not done. It's an ongoing issue. It's a big problem to tackle. But I feel confident that we're going to make a difference. You're going to see some more. We've got some triage centers right here in Sioux Falls are going to be our pilot for that. And I think getting people help the quickest that we can has really shown that's just so important. So we need to get those services to people and let them know. I think sometimes it's not even it's people not even knowing what services are available. So education as well as a part of that.
Yeah, it's not only just mental health treatment, but also drug prevention and treatment, and in particular the meth epidemic in South Dakota. Do you think the legislature is going to adequately address that this year?
You know, we will do our best. I think everyone is very concerned about it and knows that it's a big issue. It's affecting our families, our workforce. We just need to help people, and part of that, along with the help, is maybe hopefully the prevention, and along with that, obviously, is the education piece. But then dollars to go. You know, we worked with telehealth. We've these triage centers, getting people. It's just all going to be an access thing.
Mm-hmm. What about, do you see legislation emerging regarding the Keystone XL pipeline and the riot boosting bill that was so controversial this last year? Right.
You know, I think that really the heart and soul of that was taken care of last year. Mm-hmm. I look for it to be, you know, I know there's going to be the part that was ruled that it wasn't correct. We'll do a little correction on that, and hopefully it won't be a major problem.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us for Inside KELOLAND.
Thank you.
And we are going to have more of our discussion on a preview of the upcoming legislative session coming up after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're looking ahead to the 95th legislative session that starts on Tuesday. Joining me now is the House Minority Leader, State Representative Jamie Smith. Thanks for joining us, Jamie.
Thanks for having me, Perry.
Well, where do you stand on the issue of legalizing industrial hemp in South Dakota?
I've been for it. We've been working hard on that issue for a while now, and we're still very supportive of industrial hemp.
Do you think this is the year that it passes?
I have a really good feeling that we're going to be able to find some consensus on hemp and get that across the finish line this year.
Is that based on Governor Noem? He seems to be willing to sit down?
I had a nice conversation with the governor, last week, and we were, she's been opposed to that bill. That's no secret. But she gave us some guardrails that are important to her, and they're already written in this version of the bill, most of them. And so it's going to be a matter of finding the funding to do what's necessary to make sure that we have a workable bill in place.
What other funding priorities are that you see for the session this year?
My caucus's number one priority is making sure that we, pay our teachers, our state employees, and our community support providers what they're worth, and we're behind on that. We're already moving behind the half-penny sales tax raise that we've had. We're moving off of where we need to be, and so we really are going to push that we need to start the budget with increases in funding in those areas. The governor had 0 on her proposed budget. We're going to start at 3%. We think that's a fair number to start at, and then we'll see where we get.
Let's focus more on education. In particular, you're pushing for an advisory council for a pre-K education.
Yeah, we're bringing back a bill again. Representative Aaron Healy had a really good bill last year for a pre-K advisory council. We're one of 2 states in the country that doesn't have that, and we firmly believe that that's the firm foundation, and starting kids off on the right foot and having people ready to learn when they get to school can solve a lot of our problems later on in life. Quality education is the key to many of the successes for our children, and that's our future workforce, and those are the people that will be taking care of you and I as we get older. And so we really want to think about investing in those people. But this is not actually trying to set up preschool. This is just trying to set up an advisory council to discover more about this.
Let's talk about higher education and the possibility for needs-based scholarships. Where do you stand on that?
Again, we support that. South Dakota is way behind states in the region and around us on what we provide to people with need that want to go to college. I believe the number is something as low as $17 per eligible student, and the states around us, it's way more than that. And so what we need to do is, as a state, is say, what's our priority again? And I believe that education is huge. It helps with not losing students to other states around us, the brain drain that happens because people go somewhere else for opportunities because it's more affordable for them, and they end up staying there a lot of times. And we want those people to have opportunities right here in the state of South Dakota.
Will the legislature be taking up issues regarding rural broadband?
We are on that. Governor had money in her budget, which I agree with on that. I think rural broadband access in our state is very important. That goes along with some stuff we talked about with mental health also throughout the summer and different types of health things through telehealth. If you have rural broadband, you can reach communities all across our state in so many innovative ways to try to solve many of our problems in our state. And there's a component of that has to do with that broadband.
Yeah. Do you think the legislature will make strides in addressing mental health issues for South Dakota?
I sure hope so. It's a really big need in our state. And again, stability in the family and stability for people, treating mental health as an illness, and being able to quickly serve people that have acute mental health problems and needs at the earliest time, to be able to then get those people back in working and healthy. That creates a good environment in our state for workers and for families, and so we need to support that.
Now, this year is a census year, and a census is important because it determines legislative districts for the state of South Dakota, and the legislature is already kind of looking into that areas, right?
That will be coming up, and the redistricting will come up. I believe, I was not in the legislature the last time it happened, but I do remember that there was quite a drastic drop between the majority and the minority that year. And there were probably several reasons for that, but one of the areas I think had to do with redistricting and the advanced modeling that we can use to divide up our state. And so what I want to do is really work hard on geographical, boundaries in a nonpartisan way, that we just really look at how can we divide our state best between urban and rural and between counties and it's a challenge. It's going to be tough, but I think there's probably a little better way to do it, and we'll be looking at that depending on what the numbers come in at.
Yeah, we hear so much about political divisiveness at the national level. How do you assess what the tone is in the South Dakota legislature regarding Democrat and Republican?
It's something I talk about all the time, is civility in politics. All right, I believe people are really tired of fighting, and I can honestly tell you that I rarely fight with people in Pierre. I have great friends that are across the aisle from me, and we may not agree on the issue at all, but at the end of the day, I respect them and who they are as a person. And I believe both caucuses in both houses, that's the overwhelming feeling that we have here. We're South Dakota, we're friends, we're family, we're neighbors, and our job is to work together to try to solve South Dakota problems. And so there is a real collegiality between us. I think one of the differences, too, between us and Washington, we all lived together in Pierre for 3 months. Washington, they're going back and forth now, and hardly anybody seems to be a resident anymore. Our kids play basketball on the same teams. We'll see each other all over the community, and there's just no room for fighting.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for Inside KELOLAND.
Thank you.
And just after the break, we'll hear from KELOLAND's Capitol News Bureau reporter Bob Mercer with what's new at the state capitol as the session gets underway. Stay with us. Welcome back. KELOLAND's Capitol News Bureau reporter Bob Mercer is already working to cover all the news from the 2020 legislative session. In our first Capitol conversation, Bob looks at what's new at the Capitol and how you can follow his legislative coverage.
Big things that are going to be coming up that you're looking for next week?
Well, one small thing, but it's going to be a big thing, is the LRC, the Legislative Research Council, has changed how the bills, the legislation appears on their website, and so what's happening this year is the bills now that repeal laws only use the legal code, and they don't contain the entire part of the section. They don't contain the entire wording of the law, and so there are some lobbyists who are concerned about that. And then the other big change this year is just how you get into the Capitol. And,
the whole security system has changed there. I was there a couple months ago, and they were getting ready to make it go live. But yeah, what if people are coming out to Pierre for session? What can they expect?
They should come through the what I would describe as the back door, and which is on the north side. So it's a side of the Capitol that does not have the steps, if you will, and so that will be the only door that is open to the public, and then they'll have to go through a security checkpoint similar to a federal courthouse. They'll want you to walk through a metal detector, if you will, and have your bag searched if you have a bag, and they're hoping it takes 15 to 30 seconds at most,
Right.
and but the hang up then will be, if you get behind a whole bus of children,
Exactly,
you know
because that's
school
what.
kids love to come to the session, or schools love to send their kids to see the legislative session, and so that'll be a little bit of a hassle.
So you're going to be filing a lot of stories throughout session. Tell me a little bit about your process and what viewers can expect.
Well, what they can expect from me is a combination of stories. The legislature has committee meetings in the mornings, and then has what they describe as floor sessions in the afternoons. And in most weeks, those will occur 4 days of the work week. They'll either take a Monday off or a Friday off, and those are all online on the calendar. Um, and I'll try to be filing stories every day of session, and one or two stories out of committees in the morning, and several stories out of the floor action in the afternoon, and and then also just some enterprise stories throughout the week as well. So
I think the probably the best location to know what's happening in Pierre is your Twitter feed, which I pulled up here, and I put the name down there on the screen if you can see it, at Pierre Mercer. But you're posting constantly everything that you could ever need to know about what's happening in South Dakota.
I try.
That's awesome. Well, all right, Bob. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. I know it is going to be a crazy couple of days for you, so I wish you the best of luck, and let's hope we can make this a regular thing.
I look forward to it.
And again, you can follow all the news out of Pierre just by clicking on the Capitol News Bureau page. You can find it under the News tab on KELOLAND.com. After the break, we're taking a break from the legislature and look at one of our top stories from the past week. We're looking back at one of South Dakota's most high-profile killers. Hear from the authors who are writing a book on Robert Leroy Anderson next. Well, they brought you Get Ye Girl and Get Ye Girl Uncovered. And now the authors are about to release their new book, Duct Tape Killers. It's the horrifying story of convicted serial killer Robert Leroy Anderson, who kidnapped and murdered 2 area women more than 20 years ago. Don Jorgensen sits down with the authors writing The Duct Tape Killer.
Wadded up duct tape found south of
In the mid-1990s, a man by the name of Robert Leroy Anderson stalked, kidnapped, and killed 2 area women, both who were married and had young children. Their names were Larissa Demansky and Piper Striley. But as you'll find out in the new book, Duct Tape Killer, Anderson wanted more.
Robert Leroy Anderson was pure evil.
He was kind of like a Ted Bundy. He put across one personality to his family. He was able to carry off making people think that he was a good person, and in reality he was more of a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. He was one person to the people who knew him and somebody else entirely different.
Yes, he used him and used him.
Phil and Sandy Hammond co-authored the book, Duct Tape Killer.
Duct Tape Killer was kind of Robert Leroy Anderson's signature. He used duct tape in a variety of ways in this crime.
Good afternoon. Testimony in the Robert Leroy Anderson murder trial again is coming from a victim's husband. Today,
Even though the cases were highly publicized on the Daily News, they say readers will find new details never heard before about Anderson's heinous crimes.
Anderson pointed to some pine trees and said that would be a good place to bury someone.
Well, there's going to be some very interesting things in this book that nobody knows. The media, the public that even follow the case maybe very closely.
To help tell the story of the serial killer, the Hammonds enlisted the help of one of the people who knew the case better than anyone else, former Judge Larry Long, who helped prosecute Anderson back then.
They indicated they were going to write about this topic, and they wanted me to provide the background for them and the factual basis. I provided the facts and reviewed the documents and reviewed the drafts that they had written and rewrote some of it myself. And I was primarily their fact checker.
Some of those facts that came out after a 2-year investigation revealed Anderson had some of Demansky's jewelry hidden in his mother's house. They also found various forms of homemade tire poppers, which he tried using to disable vehicles on the highway. He also disguised his truck with black temper paint that could be washed off easily, so if there were any witnesses, they wouldn't be able to give an accurate description of the vehicle he was driving. But the evidence didn't stop there.
The evidence that we have indicates that Mrs. Demansky was bound with duct tape as part of the abduction and died as a result of being suffocated by having duct tape wrapped around her head.
Investigators believe Striley, whose body was never found, was kidnapped and killed in the same manner. The Hammonds say Long was a big help in writing the book.
It made it much easier to write the story because he's just a wealth of information. And then Phil usually writes the first draft, and I kind of polish it, and I always want to add more. And then he says, no, we have to keep the book a readable length because we want people, even people who aren't avid readers, to be able to read the book.
The one shocking thing they learned through their research was that Anderson was not a dumb criminal.
I thought that Robert Leroy Anderson was operating at kind of a low intellectual level, but he was actually very, very smart. And that was one thing that allowed him to carry out such sophisticated crimes at such a young age.
He was intelligent. He was smart. He didn't have much of a criminal record. My personal view was he believed that he was smarter than everybody else.
But Anderson made mistakes. Investigators found a roll of duct tape in the back of Anderson's truck and something else that proved Striley had been there too.
All we found of Mrs. Striley were 2 human head hairs with hair roots, but the technology of the day was able to extract DNA from those hair roots and establish that those were Mrs. Striley's hairs. And we found them in the back of Mr. Anderson's truck.
Plus, that duct tape that was found in the back of Anderson's truck matched up perfectly with some other strands of duct tape that investigators found in an area by the Big Sioux River south of Baltic, where a piece of Striley's shirt was found. It was the big break in the case they needed.
Without the identification of those 2 hairs that we found in the back of Anderson's truck, I don't know that we'd have gotten a conviction. It was crucial evidence.
The planning that went into these crimes, he planned out every detail. He took weeks and months. It was all that he thought about. He was obsessed with it, which is common with serial killers, and he just spent almost every minute of every day planning out how he would carry out his crimes.
And one could say it's probably the biggest crime that's ever come out of this area.
He was an evil man. He might have been the most evil man I was ever involved with.
And that was Don Jorgensen reporting. Now, the book, Duct Tape Killer, will be released on Wednesday. That's all the time we have for now. You can find out more about today's topics online at KELOLAND.com. Just click on the Inside KELOLAND section. Good night.